What is going on, guys? Welcome back to my channel, where today we're going to be talking about the silent killers. This is the Mafia's most feared hitmen. These guys would take out targets without even being seen. They are ghosts. They are legends. And it's not often that we get to hear about them. But in this video, I'm going to do just that. This is the silent killers. Now let's get started. Angelo Bruno. First up on this list, we have Angelo Bruno, also known as the Angel of Death. He was an Italian-American mafia hitman who worked for the Philadelphia crime family. Over his career, he was said to have murdered around 100 people, mostly by strangulation. Many of his victims were actually strangled with the victim's own pantyhose or stockings. That was his MO. You can't get more silent than that. Angelo was so successful at what he did that he was one of the most respected members of the Philly crime family. So much so that when he applied for the coveted position as underboss, he was turned down flat. Because according to the boss at the time, Nicky Scarfo, Bruno was, quote, not smart enough. And then later on, when Scarfo himself had become a made man, Bruno was given the job of whacking him. So there's no question that this guy was deadly. Paul Vario. Paul Vario was one of the most ruthless mobsters to ever come out of the Mafia, originally from Brooklyn. New York Vario got involved with the Lucchese crime family and worked alongside some of the biggest names in the Mafia. When he was young, he was best friends with Matty Madonna, son of legendary mobster Charles Lucky Luciano. But unfortunately, their friendship came crashing down when Vario whacked. Matty, in 1962, after a drug deal gone wrong, Vario's ruthlessness didn't stop there, continued to climb the ranks of the Lucchese crime family until he became the capo regime, or the head of a crew. During his time as a capo, he was responsible for ordering and carrying out numerous hits. One of his most infamous murders was the 1978 slaying of a federal witness named Michael Franzese. Vario ordered Franzese to be buried alive in concrete, and when cops later dug up the grave, they found out that Franzese had been entombed while still alive. As you can imagine, this kind of stuff didn't go unnoticed. Eventually, Paul Vario was arrested and sentenced to 100 years in prison, where he died in 1988. Michael Francis Trigger Marcelli. Trigger Marcelli was a soldier in the Bonanno crime family, and he earned his nickname because he was known for being quick on the trigger. But unlike most hitmen who used guns, Marcel preferred knives. In fact, he was responsible for killing at least 3 people with knives during the Mafia. It's a gang war of the 1960s. But it wasn't all about preference. Sometimes Marcelli had to use knives because of circumstance. For example, in 1963, he killed 2 men who tried to rob a poker game that he was working as security for, and he did it with a pair of scissors. Now, if that's not silent, I don't know what is. Trigger Marcelli was also involved in several other murders during his career, but as time went on, he became tired of life as a mobster and eventually turned informant. After he left the Mafia, he was given immunity, and he spent the rest of his days traveling around the country with his wife and kids, living under the Witness Protection Program. Thomas Busaggio. Thomas Busaggio was a hitman for the Colombo crime family, and he was one of the most mysterious figures in the Mafia. That's because he was so selective about the jobs he took on that only a handful of murders could be linked to him. But that doesn't mean he wasn't effective. One of his most famous hits was the murder of Alphonse, the Scar Salerno. In the early 1960s, Salerno had become a big shot in the Genovese crime family, but he was also becoming a problem. He was bragging about being a made man in the Genovese family, while simultaneously claiming that he was a high-ranking member of the Colombo family. Needless to say, this double jeopardy was a problem. So Busaggio was brought in to handle the situation, and handle it he did. According to legend, he took out Salerno with a single shot to the back of the head, then simply walked away. To this day, nobody knows for sure how or why Thomas Busaggio became a hitman. What we do know is that he was a regular guy who lived a normal life until he was suddenly killed in a freak accident in 1979. He was fixing a television set in his garage when it suddenly caught fire and ultimately resulted in his death. Charles the Fox Sit Ricotta. Sit Ricotta's name comes from the fact that he was very sly and cunning. He was considered one of the smartest mobsters in the Bonanno crime family, and he always seemed to be 2 steps ahead of the feds. Throughout his career, he avoided jail time despite being a suspect in over 50 murders. It's rumored that he got away with so many murders because he was able to hire hitmen from outside of the Mafia, Instead of sticking to family business, he hired regular street guys who had no ties to organized crime. That way, when these random murders started happening, the police had no idea who to look at. In addition to being a great strategist, Citrica was also a vicious killer. He once ordered the murder of a bookmaker after he lost a large sum of money. And to make matters worse, he had the guy killed in front of his wife and kids. If that's not terrifying, I don't know what is. Richard Icepick Cantarella. Richard Cantarella was a hitman for the Colombo crime family, and he was known for being one of the most brutal killers in the Mafia. He earned his nickname because he was known for dismembering his victims with an ice pick. Now, I know we mentioned earlier that Michael Marcelli preferred knives, but this guy took things to another level. He literally chopped up his victims into pieces. Cantarella was extremely loyal to the Colombo crime family, and he was willing to go to any lengths to protect their interests. In fact, he was so dedicated that he didn't even think twice before committing murder. He was even willing to kill other mobsters if he felt they were becoming a liability to the family. At one point, he was ordered to kill a made man named Joseph Jablonski, along with his wife and daughter. Now, even though this was obviously a very difficult assignment, Cantarella didn't hesitate. He carried out the hit and made sure that every member of the family was dead. Later on, he tried to join the Gambino crime family, but they weren't having it. And he ended up getting whacked by the Colombias as a result. Frank Thierry. Frank Thierry was a soldier in the Genovese crime family, and he was considered to be one of the most professional hitmen in the Mafia. That's because he was always discreet and never left any evidence behind. In fact, there were so few witnesses to his crimes that it was sometimes difficult for law enforcement to even connect him to the murders he committed. But even though Tyrelli was careful, he still managed to get himself into trouble. In the late 1950s, he became involved in a power struggle within the Genovese crime family, and things quickly got out of hand. To make a long story short, Tyrelli ended up killing a rival mobster named Anthony Staropoli in a public place. But when the cops arrived at the scene, all they found was a blood-stained umbrella. With no other evidence to go off of, they were unable to arrest Thierry. However, this incident was eventually brought up in a different case, and Thierry was finally convicted. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, where he died in 1988. Joseph, Joe, the Animal Barbera. Joseph Barbera was a hitman for the Bonanno crime family, and he was one of the most ferocious killers in the Mafia. He got his nickname because he was known for attacking his victims like a wild animal. He was strong and violent, and he didn't hesitate to use deadly force. But even though he was a tough guy, Barrera wasn't afraid to be sneaky either. He was known for planning his hits carefully and making sure that he had the element of surprise on his side. This allowed him to carry out hits with little to no evidence left behind. And that's exactly what he did when he killed mobster Francis Cadillac Frank Thierry. He followed Thierry to his car and shot him dead in front of his wife and kids. Then he got in his getaway car and disappeared. Like that was the last anyone ever saw of Joe, the Animal Barrera. Those are just a few of the Mafia's most feared hitmen. Do you know of any others? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.